We're going to call to order the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Executive Committee on Friday, October 23rd. We are operating under special provisions afforded by the governor's executive order. So we're conducting this meeting teleconferenced. We're using the Zoom platform. Members of the public are able to attend, and via the technology, they will be able to speak on items for up to 3 minutes. Did that cover everything I need to say? Just double check with the clerk, make sure I'm okay. So we'll officially call the meeting to order. And as we are teleconferenced, everything will be done by roll call vote today. And we will start by our roll call to see who's here.
Thank you. Chair Miller.
Present.
Vice Chair Smith.
Present.
Gibbons.
Present.
Sinks.
Good morning.
Good morning. Abe Koga.
Raining.
Thank you. All are present.
Okay, somebody's unmuted and causing an echo, but that's okay. Next up is public comment on matters not on the agenda. Any member of the public may address the body for up to 3 minutes on matters not on the agenda. If you wish to do so, please indicate that by raising your virtual hand, or if you're on the phone, that can be done by pressing *9. Seeing no one, we will come back to us. I believe there was a request to jump straight ahead to the innovation programs, and then we can come back to the consent calendar. Anybody object to that? I'm seeing none. Then I think we can go straight to Amy, right? Or Garish, do you want to start us off? Amy.
Straight to Amy, please.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and Directors. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak. Next slide, please. The purpose of this item is to provide an update on SVCE's innovation programs, as well as to seek feedback on a draft request to the board. I'll keep my comments succinct in order to get to your questions and discussion, but please feel free to interrupt if you have questions throughout. Next slide, please. So by way of background, the board approved our decarb roadmap in December of 2018, and the decarb roadmap includes 6 focus areas of the program's portfolio, shown in the schematic in the lower right there. One of the focus areas is innovation, and the board approved 2 specific innovation programs, along with $1.2 million in funds for implementation for FY19 to FY20. Next slide, please. The overarching goal of the innovation programs is really to try to leverage our position to engage and support the innovation ecosystem to address the climate crisis. Next slide, please. And the 2 specific programs that the board approved are Innovation Partners and Innovation On-Ramp. And we typically describe those programs based on where they are along this pipeline. So you'll notice Innovation Partners is on the left part of the pipeline. It focuses on the earliest stages of more ideation and prototype development. And this program really focuses mainly on events such as sponsoring and organizing hackathons or other innovation events. Then Innovation On-Ramp is later on in this pipeline once there are prototypes to demonstrate and to provide a framework for really demonstrating the value of commercialized solutions. And so that's the second program. Next slide, please. Here are the primary activities we carried out through Innovation Partners over the past couple of years. We sponsored 3 hackathons, and then we also organized our own Grid Shift hackathon. These events engaged hundreds of people, students, innovators, entrepreneurs, to really help them focus on solutions to address climate change and improve the health and welfare of our communities. I did go ahead and include that 3rd hackathon that we sponsored in there, although it technically was canceled last minute due to COVID. We are in the process of repurposing funds. As you might expect, events have taken a bit of a hit, and so we haven't had any, obviously, any in-person innovation activities since Grid Shift. Next slide, please. So Grid Shift was the hackathon that SVCE organized. It took place January 31st to February 1st of this year, and it was hosted by Google Launchpad, a space up in SF. Next slide. And we brought on 4 other community power agencies to help sponsor it. There were around 100 hackers that competed for 24 hours for 16K in prizes. And the winners were shown here. They each had developed apps to smart schedule a customer's flexible electrical loads, find charging stations to optimize cost, carbon, and convenience, and an app that connected to a passive light in the home to alert customers on planned power shutoffs and high electricity prices. Next slide, please. So this quote from Director Miller was in the press release about the event, and we wanted to include it here because I think it's a nice quote for the event, but it applies more broadly across our innovation programs. Specifically, it's in our best interest to engage the talented minds in our community to generate the best ideas and think creatively about solutions that will benefit our residents and businesses and help us achieve our goals. And so this really is, I think, a nice, succinct description of why we're pursuing these innovation programs to begin with. Next slide, please. So that update was on Innovation On-Ramp, Innovation Partners. The second program is Innovation On-Ramp. And this is a program that provides small grants to third parties to launch innovative pilots. And this program provides that framework for allowing us to really rapidly partner and rapidly test new ideas. Next slide, please. In the past couple years, we've made a lot of progress with this program, specifically developing the infrastructure for it, such as the application, evaluation process, standardized partnership agreements, et cetera. We've also already held 3 different application rounds, 3 calls for applications. The first one was an open call. The second one had a theme of mobility, and the latest one had a theme of resilience. And you can see in the parentheses by each one, the response that we've received has increased significantly each time. And at this point in time, we've launched 6 pilots from the first 2 application rounds and are currently in negotiations with 5 more from the latest resilience round. Next slide, please. So the pilots we've launched to date are with these partners. More info is on in the appendix and also on our website. I'm also happy to delve into any one if you'd like. Next slide, please. But then regarding budget for the 2 innovation programs, we are currently scheduled or effectively set to deplete the original budget allocation, effectively on schedule. So an additional budget allocation would be required to continue the innovation programs. A summary of the budget status is shown here. Specifically, these costs for Innovation On-Ramp in particular, I did want to note they include program admin support from CSE, the Center for Sustainable Energy, as well as evaluation support from ADM, which is our evaluation consultant, in addition to direct pilot funding. And one thing actually that's missing from this table is co-funding that I apologize I should have included. For Grid Shift, for innovation, under Innovation Partners, for instance, we arranged 20K, approximately 20K in sponsorship funds from the other CCAs and munis to help sponsor that event. For Innovation On-Ramp, the 6 pilots that have already launched, those pilots leverage around 250K in co-funding. So we're really trying to use our limited programs funds as a force multiplier and to bring other resources to the table. Next slide, please. So the proposed next steps are to seek board approval for a budget allocation for the coming couple years to continue the innovation programs. For Innovation Partners in particular, again, in-person events have been clearly hampered, but we will look out for the opportunity to sponsor potentially virtual events, as well as evaluate maybe organizing a second hackathon of our own, potentially 2022. For Innovation On-Ramp, the next steps would be, we haven't carried out a comprehensive survey of past applicants and participants on ways to improve the program. So that's one thing that we do want to do in the near term. We'd also like to add an additional funding stage that's more of a seed round, a smaller amount of funding, 5 to 20K, to support earlier stage concepts. And I should have also included explicitly under Innovation On-Ramp, the proposed next step is to continue the program with the semi-annual application cycle. Next slide, please. And so the draft request to the board would be to approve a budget allocation of 600K per year for the upcoming 2 fiscal years. So this would be maintaining the same level of funding as the first 2 years of our programs. The proposal has no incremental fiscal impact in that all of the spending that's proposed would be within the board approved budget for programs. So it's within the 2% of operating revenues that's approved for programs. This is proposing to effectively earmark it. Next slide, please. Yes, so thanks very much for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions. I realize I went fairly briskly through that. The next steps would be to hear your questions, answer your questions, understand your feedback, integrate that feedback, and contingent on that, potentially bring a board request at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I thought your rate was perfect, so it wasn't that fast. And it's actually pretty amazing all that we're doing. And probably the most obvious question, when we started, everything was sort of early stage. And now we have things distributed all across the spectrum. And so I'm just wondering, you're proposing exactly the same budget. I'm just trying to get my arms around that, because it seems like if we have more things late stage, those projects, those opportunities cost more than the initial early stage items.
Let's see if I understand your question correctly. When you say early stage, you're referring to the pipeline that I showed, like
Yes.
towards ideation versus the later stage ones.
Mhm.
So what we found, what we're contemplating doing, and part of the reason why there's a suggestion to add the additional stage of funding for a seed round that's a smaller amount, is to actually be able to alternate back and forth between the seed round, maybe in one semi-annual application cycle, and then focus on later stage pilots in the later cycles. So we found, especially including EM&V, like proper resources for evaluation, measurement, and verification, we will definitely make good use of the funds. And we've been able to basically accommodate a larger number of pilots than expected. And so I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question about why the proposal is the same. It did take some kind of startup costs, but largely the anticipated number of pilots and budget would effectively require a commensurate financial commitment unless we wanted to change elements of that.
Okay, I'll be more explicit. It seemed like you should have more money since we're doing more late projects.
Oh, you want to give me more money? Okay. Okay. Well, if you wanted to do that, we would put it to good use.
No, right. You see my dilemma is, right, we did a bunch of early things in the pipeline which were cheaper. And now that the pipeline's filled up and we're getting lots more applications on the later stages, it seemed as though it would have seemed more logical to have a higher request. We have to make the financial decision, so I'm not offering you more money. I'm just trying to understand the calculus that went on to let's keep it the same, given the different mix of what's in the pipeline.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that clarification. The limiting factor really isn't budget, it's staff resources.
Okay.
That's the answer.
Okay, there we go. Nancy?
Thank you, Chair Miller. I think this is great. I appreciate the update. And I learned what a white label platform is. I had to look it up. So I guess I'm kind of wondering for these pilots and the stages, there's no mention of if any of our, recipients have commercialized already. So if you could add maybe, or just update us, have any of them commercialized yet? Or happening with that?
Yeah, so for, if we take the first cohort, utility API, the pilot with them called the Data Hive. In that case, they have, they are a commercial entity. They already have other products. The pilot with them was to demonstrate a specific new technology that was financed by the Department of Energy solar program. And since actually our pilot, they've gone on to deploy that same technology to 3 other utilities at this point. And so our pilot was the first of its kind with them. That is to say, an extremely streamlined and easy to use Green Button Connect platform. And so there's been a lot of progress with that particular pilot, and kind of it's very clear how the pilot with them has helped advance their technology. For EV, sorry, I can go through each one if you'd like, but basically for each one, I could provide a summary of how the pilot has led to additional outcomes, basically helping to kind of deploy to a larger scale.
Yeah, I think that would be valuable. I mean, and then maybe also some data about you have this triangle in the kind of the, the sideways pyramid, the idea, prototype, commercialization. If there, could be just some verbiage or chart around how many made it to each stage, that would be really kind of, just visually interesting.
Sure.
Or yeah, I mean, if the idea is the commercialization and rolling it out is kind of the goal, then how would you characterize our progress? So that's a way, I think, to measure the effectiveness of the program. So that would be very helpful. And then regarding the evaluation criteria, the scalable and transferable, as it turns out, really works with the white label things, which you can just put your logo on it and call it a day. But then you've got the core role for SVCE as a criteria. So these things that are scalable and transferable and shareable with other CCAs with this core role for SVCE seem a little bit at odds. So I'm kind of wondering, what if that's a conflict at all, and if so, it seems like you've been rightfully probably focusing on things that are more transferable, but just maybe giving some thought to the criteria and being a little more, I don't know, explaining about potential conflicts in the criteria.
Sure. Yeah, I can provide a couple examples. Like, for instance, core rule for SVCE, we have received applications that focus on, for instance, setting up an on-demand commuter bus system. And although that's a very, interesting idea that, obviously that was pre-COVID, an interesting idea, but maybe not exactly kind of relevant given our mission and given our core focus. And so typically the core role for SVCE focuses on kind of those concepts that really aren't related to us providing electricity more so. But I completely agree with you. Some of the evaluation criteria can be in conflict at points. One of the evaluation criteria is equity, for instance, and some of those solutions in particular, it can be hard to make an argument for scalability and transferability when you're really trying to tackle the hardest part of the problem. And so it's definitely more art than science, but we do incorporate multiple internal and external folks during the evaluation process to be very rigorous. And so there are subject matter experts at Center for Sustainable Energy that review all of the applications and provide their assessment, as well as internal folks at SVCE.
Okay, great. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next. Thanks. That's it for me, Chair.
Rod had his hand up, then Liz.
Hey, thanks. Good morning again. Yesterday, the Air District put on a tech marketplace, and it's called Climate Tech, and it's specifically talking about the ideas of this author, who I got to introduce. Her name is Mariana Mazzucato. And then we had several really good panels about the role of government in spurring innovation. And the standard idea that Silicon Valley is simply a bunch of really smart Harvard grads. Oh, no offense to you, Margaret, but or Stanford grads. No offense to you, Howard. Is just patently false. The government has been involved in every big innovation for decades. The internet may be a famous example, and many things from space program and so forth. So I would commend the program to your study and the ideas in this book. And it seems like with what we're doing, we are trying to create this world. One of the very interesting ideas that I think comes from this is, and this may be a legal question, but do we have the ability to retain some equity in companies that we essentially help start through our innovation grants? That's a key idea in this economist Mazzucato's thesis, that successful government entities are able to bankroll continuing innovation by retaining some IP, some ownership of some of the IP. Maybe this isn't a relevant idea, maybe it is, but I think our ability to, as Nancy said, track successes, right, through the pipeline, be able to identify our fingerprints on them, at the very least, is important. We ought to have some metrics that let us be able to publicize for the world, and including key stakeholders in our ecosystem. That would, of course, include the legislature, the governor, Cal ISO, and so forth, PUC, for these players, how we are moving the needle. And so, anyway, I wanted to bring up that program in this context. I think the strategic question that'll come to the board, ought to come to the board, is what fraction of revenue ought we be putting into programs? And you can make several arguments about that, but all I've seen of what Amy, your team, and SVC as a whole has done so far is, it would seem, right, it's hard to tell, but it would seem that we're making effective use. And I'll support whatever you want to do. And I think the bigger question that Howard raises is, okay, how much do we want in the program? Is this enough? And okay, if we need more staffing to deal with it, we could, the board would entertain that too, I believe. And I will continue to ask you to figure out how you can collaborate with others. We've done a lot with the Building Decarb Institute, on whose board Amy sits, and also the Air District and CARB at the state level. So let's keep this engine running. Thanks.
Liz had a question, but Grish's hand went up. So is there something you needed to add at this moment, Grish? And then we'll go to Liz.
Yeah, maybe just to address Rod's point and also your point on money and adding to this. It's just to emphasize what Amy said. It's a prioritization issue. And from a bandwidth standpoint and prioritization, at this point, I don't think we'll add additional resources on innovation. We're doing a ton, but there are other things that are almost more important that Amy's in charge of, that we really need to do that. So I think it's just a matter of timing. So yes, I love the support I get from the board. And so maybe we'll take this back and think about this in terms of, if there are new positions that need to come in, and we're going to talk about that in item 5, actually, with one new position. So I want to have some time to think about that, because when we add new positions, it's a long-term kind of commitment. And
Yeah,
it's
so
also,
I get it. And,
Yeah.
there's a lot of risk still. There's the regulatory risk, and we have to be prudent. So I get it. But
It may not be as much as adding a position, Grish, but supposing there was some pilot that we really wanted to do, but it was
Mhm.
250K. It certainly seems like you could come back
Yes.
and pitch that to the board and say, this one's special.
Lovely. Yes.
And we need to spend some more money this time. And there are other
Right.
ways rather than just saying add headcount and total capacity to the whole program. So
Thanks for the broadening of the essence of what you said. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
okay, I'm backlogged. I got to do Liz, and then we got Margaret. Where did Margaret go? Oh, you changed corners. This confuses me every time somebody quits speaking. We're going to do Liz and then Margaret.
Okay, so just a quick comment. I appreciate the conversation that we've had so far. One thing that popped into my head as Rod was speaking about BachMed, we've been very fortunate on the board to have people like Rod and others on major committees like BachMed. And I know Margaret's going to be on BachMed, stay on there. But I think we've got to be thoughtful about keeping partnerships with organizations like BachMed and things too. So I'm just thinking about that in terms of the benefits for the programs that they've offered and the connections. So it's just a general comment.
Okay, Margaret.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back. I appreciate the conversation about potentially increasing capacity. I guess for me, it would be helpful to, and you're probably going to do this, but just like see all the different programs, and as you mentioned, Girish, prioritizing and then figuring out where best to, where we get the biggest bang for our buck. And I think I'm focused really on more of like, what can we do to get out to the masses more? So if we could have a bigger overview at some point, that would be helpful when we're ready to start to ramp up all of our programs. Thanks.
Excellent. Let me check to see if any member of the public wishes to comment on this item. If you wish to do so, please indicate that by raising your virtual hand, or if you're on the phone, pressing *9. No hands have flown up. This is just a discussion, and I think maybe to summarize, we're happy. We're happy with what's going on in this space, and we're not adverse to the budget proposal that you've made. And if other opportunities should avail themselves, it certainly seems as though it would be a worthy discussion. As Margaret notes, a discussion in the context of our overall priorities. Does that sound fair to everybody? Liz?
I was just going to also add that I thought Nancy's comments about providing a little more detail about the progress of the different things that have been sponsored would be very beneficial.
Yeah, it's like some things I just assume, oh yeah, they're going to do that. So anything else?
If you wouldn't mind, Howard, just summarizing what you said in terms of follow-up kind of what we could take away. In addition to what you said, I think Rod had also mentioned, IP ownership, so we can take a look at that. And I think Margaret's point is kind of common to what Nancy and Liz were saying. I think we can talk about the bigger picture. The innovation is one piece of our program portfolio. And one of the things that we've put into our goals for this year is measurements. So, and this is, Amy explained this super great to me. When you think about measuring the impact we have, you're basically modeling the economy, which is extremely complicated. So it's not as simple, you know, when you're talking about transportation and buildings, it's complicated, but it doesn't mean we can't approximate it. But I think the idea is, how's the program portfolio as a whole, innovation being one piece of it, providing that bigger picture and how we can reach mass markets, et cetera. So there's lots of information there. So we'll take that, maybe we'll have a separate session. We'll come back to the exec committee first with that bigger picture and then take it to the board.
You know, Grish, it might be helpful. We do the roadmap at the beginning. My only feedback is I wish it was a straight line, but we all know it's never going to be a straight line. But you could put, you know, relative dollar amounts or something sort of in our 6 key focus areas, so we could see this in some sort of broader context of 2% of our budget gets broken up these ways. We're talking about this small percentage in innovation, and here's what we're doing in that space. There could be probably a very uniform, you know how I like to see the same slides over and over again, some uniform slide that gave the big picture, and then each time we talked about a different area, we would highlight that, but it would be in context.
Great. Yep. We'll do that. Thanks.
I heard nothing but positive, supportive feedback, and I'm hopeful staff walks away with that same impression. And as we always say, just go forth and keep changing the world. So you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
All right. So next up, we're gonna circle back to our consent calendar. We moved that one up because Amy was double booked. So consent calendar. There's only one item on it. Is there any discussion or a motion?
I move consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, that was Liz and then Nancy. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on our consent calendar, which is approval of minutes from the 25th? If you wish to do so, indicate by raising your virtual hand. And if you're on the phone, you can do that by pressing *9. Seeing none, we come back to the body. Does anybody have any comments on these? Seeing none, we'll get a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Chair Miller,
Aye.
Vice Chair Smith,
Yes.
Gibbons,
Yes.
Sinks,
Aye.
Abe Koga.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you guys for that. Next up is our CEO update.
Yeah, the only update I have for you is on the power prepay program. Thank you for approving, the board approved us moving forward with legal counsel for disclosure and prepay, et cetera. We did tell you that we were in the final stages of selecting a municipal financial advisor. We have selected Public Financial Management, who happens to be our FA also. So we are doing the contracting right now with them, and we'll bring it to the board at the November meeting. The second item is a piece of CCA good news, which is 3CE, previously known as Monterey Bay Community Power, has received a bond rating from Standard & Poor's, and they have got the A rating. Yes, Howard.
We chose wrong.
We are. So I've reached out to S&P, and we are going to be getting a rating from them. So we are in that process right now. So I just want to tell you, it's great news for the CCA community as a whole, because all CCAs will rise in this tide, and it's good to have a diversity of opinions from the rating agency community as to how they see our future.
So
I like diversity too, but let's go get an A rating also.
Yes.
Or if not an A+.
No, you get more A's. I got a question. You know, they're a CCA that's on a rampant mission of growth. And is that a factor in that A rating for them, or do you think it's purely just the economics and financial policies? Or do you know?
No, I think it's the way in which the rating agencies are assessing risk is a little different. I think the fundamentals of, and just looking at this, I think it's just a little different. I think the matrix and the weighting of how they're assessing risks and stability is a little different.
Yeah, I haven't gone through that interview. They seemed very overamped up on some of the risks, and that was virtually most of the whole discussion. So,
Yeah.
I felt we didn't get all the credit we could have deserved for our enormous financial capacity
Yep.
and strength of responsiveness. So I look forward to. I know it'll take months and months, but I look forward to us ending up with an A rating someplace.
Yes, we are going to attempt to do it before you leave the board.
Okay, that's only 2 months, but it's good. I'm excited. All right, I didn't mean to cut you off. Rod and I are
No,
just
I'm done.
excited about this.
Thank you.
I have one small question, Grish, and that is on the staffing side. How are we doing in filling some of the positions we were looking at?
Great. Oh, sorry, I have a big announcement I just made yesterday to staff. Sorry about this. I
Sorry.
should have teed it up. I was going to write an email to you on Monday. We just announced yesterday evening that we have hired a new CFO. So the CFO, his name is Amrit Singh. He has 20 years of experience in the energy business, of which 8 years he was a senior director at PG&E, working in their credit and risk management area, and then in the rates and regulation area. And so he has a very deep experience in energy risk management. And in terms, and then he's also worked for about 12 years in a company called Electric Trade. That's how he started off, about 5 years. And then he started his own management consulting firm where he consulted to investor-owned utilities. And more recently, he did some short-term.
Your audio
Systems too.
your audio cut out, Grish. We lost 30 seconds of that. Sorry.
Oh boy. Okay.
Or we could
Is it
accept
better?
it as great news, and we'll
Yeah.
all get the official letter on Monday.
Yes.
That sounds good. Sorry, Grish, I just had to kind of ask that. I always hate to put the CEO on the spot, but it seemed big.
No, thank you. If I may say something, we are running into difficulties on another position, the power analyst. So we're going out to recruit again. We'll be starting that next Monday. So it's been a mixed bag. And Amy's decarb analyst position, we had a couple of hiccups on that in terms of getting people in, but we're making an offer to another person. That's, again, probably today. An offer will be going out to that person. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. So I'll continue to update you on that.
It takes more time than you'd hope. I think we're doing
Yep.
great. So
Yep.
Thank you for that spontaneous report. Any
I'm just
questions on?
curious, when would the new CFO start?
November 9th.
Oh, that's quick. Okay. Well, by all means, tell Don, the Don number 3. Thank you very much from the board.
Yeah, we'll continue to have Don through. I'm planning on keeping him through the end of December because he brings in a certain background that would be helpful in the transition. And he's also working on the power prepay program. And so it'll help to keep that momentum going on some big projects that we have.
Great.
We need somebody to get a credit rating. All right, if that's the conclusion, let me check with the public. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on the CEO report? If you wish to do so, indicate by raising your virtual hand, or if you're on the phone, that can be done by pressing *9. Seeing none, we will consider the CEO report complete, and we will move forward to the Super GPA formation.
So let's see. Have this in front of you. So wanted to just follow up with you on the comments that we got from the board at the last meeting. And so if you can go to the next slide. I'd say the overall feedback we got was, if I had to summarize Rod's comments, there are two big R's. There's the risk and the reward. And this one comes with both. And I think just our business has a lot of risk, has a lot of reward, and how do you kind of manage the two? So I just put the questions that I thought we got from the board. Really nothing here that was out of the ordinary in terms of the feedback that we got. So, why a super JPA versus a joint agreement? We can do it either way. And so a super JPA is a vehicle that will enable us to do contracting simpler and in more streamlined manner. But I don't think a super JPA is an answer to all transactions that we're going to do. So in some cases, a joint agreement would work better. In other cases, a super JPA would work better. And it's not just our choice, it also comes from the other side's desires and preferences, right? So if you have a large developer for renewable resource or a long duration energy storage resource, if the preference of the developer is to deal with fewer counterparties, having a super JPA is a way to actually get that going. So I think in the long run, CCAs will continue to use both forms. If we create a super JPA, in some transactions, we'll use a super JPA. In other transactions, we'll either do it ourselves or do it through a joint agreement. I think other potential projects for the super JPA, it's all TBD. It just depends on the scope. The scope, we want to keep it as broad as possible, or should I say non-limiting as possible. But it's going to depend on what the needs and desires of members are, or subsets of members in terms of what projects we would pursue jointly. Participation levels, it's a little bit of a TBD. It depends on what you're talking about. If it's within the participation agreement for a particular project, it would be by ownership share or commitment share. That's how participation levels will be determined. And those are also, there's a little bit of TBD on that. Say, for example, there's a 100 megawatt project and we have 250 megawatts worth of interest. There's got to be a way of allocating it. And typically in JPAs, you just make it up by, it tends to be through size, and sometimes it'll be one member, one share. And I've seen different ways of doing it where they'll allocate it. A 50% of the size is based on one member, one share, and 50% of the size is allocated on how large you are. And so it just depends on the situation. Voting would be similar, where voting for JPA matters, so that's just the administrative matters, would most likely be one member, one share, whereas voting for the project would be based on your commitment, your financial commitment. Who will be managing the LDES project, the long duration energy storage project? And I think the question was actually the process of getting to the end of getting to a transaction. So we are in the process of hiring two individuals. One is legal counsel, another would be a chief negotiator. And those two folks will be taking the lead for both negotiating and getting a transaction, and also developing the participation agreements with all the members. We hope to have the JPA board seated by the end of January. So we'll have a chair selected in the JPA board, and I expect it'll be the JPA board will probably select a chair there and have that person along with maybe a interim executive director who'll be probably at halftime or something like that, managing these two folks. Or maybe it's so it's a TBD, but it'll be the JPA, the answer would be the JPA board, and most likely the chair would be managing these folks and the project. How's Super JPA viewed by the state? So far, quite positively. You've seen some of the press across the board, right from the independent energy producers, really thinking that this was a positive move by the CCAs, the energy storage community, and others. So I think on the whole, it's been a positive response that we've got, and we'll continue to reach out to legislators as time goes on and as we make progress. The last bullet is probably going to be the toughest one to manage, right? So because each of us come in, how is risk and reward balance? And there are all kinds of, I can say, timelines around that. There's the reward around operations, right? So if you have a 100 megawatt unit, how do you optimize, say, energy storage? How do you optimize it for joint benefit? What if someone wants to dispatch it differently than someone else? So that basically will be figured out in the operating agreements. The participate, so those are more short term, and those are, there's quite a bit of history of ways in which we do it. Both Monica and I and Tom Habashi have been part of a power pool for many years in our work at NCPA. And you basically figure out ways to manage the benefits between members. The other thing, like step-up provisions, right? So what if one member fails? How do you manage that risk? What if folks come in, participating members come in with different ratings? How is the price that we get from the market allocated so those who have a better financial rating has those benefits? I have to say that's also a TBD. So that's going to be dealt with in the project agreements, and that is a matter of discussion as we are speaking right now. So that's the big picture. Let's go to the next slide. Go through the next slides relatively quickly because I would be repeating myself really what I said already. So overall, the JPA is an enabling organization. So that's what the agreement that we hope to bring to you in December is, the enabling agreement essentially. It is the actual projects that the JPA would enter into. It would be optional for members of the JPA to sign up for those projects. So that's why the JPA is an enabling organization, and the actual procurement programs or whatever project we enter into would be an opt-in. And then within that project agreement, the benefits and risks would be allocated within the project agreements. One other issue that has come up is to avoid duplication and overlap with other CCA policy and advocacy efforts wherever possible. We don't want to create an organization that has a big life of its own in the sense of, okay, who's representing CCAs as a whole? And Cal CCA is the trade association that is representing CCAs at the state level. So we want to avoid duplication and overlap as much as possible. Next. Other principles when it comes, so this is getting into the weeds. This is not really the enabling agreement, but it's more of talking to you about what will be coming to you in the middle of next year, which is the principles related to the project agreements. You know, we have the financial commitments, what each member is obligated to do. What are the obligations of project participants? That will be spelled out. The decisions on dispute resolution, and then also who would be additional, who could come into a project. You know, so how do we add project participants? Do we want to keep it open to non-JPA members? And I think the general sense right now is yes, we would want to keep it open to non-JPA members to also participate in projects. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, we are looking to finalize the enabling agreement in the next few days. The lawyers of all 9 CCAs have been working at it. There have been several iterations, there have been about 4 iterations of the agreement already. And all the CEOs of these 9 CCAs, we're going to meet next week, discuss some outstanding issues. And we are targeting the end of this month to basically have the agreement finalized and move into kind of like a no-touch zone. Because at some point, we've got to cut off changes as the agreement gets circulated to all 9 CCA boards. So we can't make changes after a certain point. So we're looking at, so that would be another thing that we'll be discussing in the coming week to basically get a cutoff date, and we are aiming for end of October. And next steps, I was thinking of updating the board, maybe not as much detail as I'm doing with you today, but I'd love your advice on that. Just update the board either as part of the CEO report, or if you think it's better that I do it as a regular item, I'd be happy to do that. And then keep you up to date by bringing it back to the exec committee. Maybe I'll bring it to the finance committee also to give them an update. And I'm targeting December 9th for approval of the JPA agreement. And of course, the project participation agreement is targeted for Q3 2021. So that's what I have as an update to you, and open for questions and feedback.
I agree with your generic strategy of socializing it through all the boards to the extent possible. There is something that's missing in this, Grish, and it's sort of implied. Who's in charge? And I think, right, we're in charge. Silicon Valley Clean Energy is in charge of our destiny. And this super JPA is filling some small is the wrong word, but some unmet need, right? And so you describe this in this way, and you can get lost pretty quick saying, oh, this is going to be the overarching organization in the state, and we're going to keep it from conflicting with Cal CCA. Your brain starts to say, wait a minute, is this like a super JPA that oversees us and sets our strategy? No, that's really there to provide a specific need that needs to be done in scale for us. I don't know how that comes across, but just that's what struck me. Liz had some
I did, thank you. Very much along your comment, but slightly different, is I think you should present it to the board. You can be briefer than what you've done here, is just an update. But one of the things that I would appreciate, and I guess the rest of the board would, is how is this is going to be a very complex legal set of documents. And so who's going to be reviewing the documents for us? I'm thinking the new CFO might be a really good person to have to review these kind of documents, given his background. But is our legal counsel appropriate for this kind of agreement? And would the JPA have its own legal counsel to kind of be an arbiter? So I'm looking for, I'm going to call it a risk comfort level with the legal implications, because you're talking about an awful lot of agreements and an awful lot of things that you're being right now vague about, on how we divvy things up and how you bring new people in and how you do all of that. Frankly, what you just presented was a little daunting, and in part because it was vague. So my comment is, what's the risk and how are we managing the risk? And the risk to me appears to be mostly legal. And frankly, that would tie to Howard's question, which is, excuse me, that this is, the Super JPA is really a mechanism for compliance, and nothing more, right? I mean, at least at this point, I know it can encompass a lot of different things, but it's long-term storage, long-term duration storage is really what its focus is. So I think it would be very helpful to, at least initially, confine that and understand how it's going to be legally protected.
Great. If I may just reflect on yours and Howard's comments, it gets to, there is a need that we have. It's an unmet need. And it gets to, for example, technology risk. or economies of scale. We are too small to participate in some larger projects. So yes, we would do the majority of our procurement ourselves, but there is an unmet need. And so it's for the unmet need that we are creating this JPA where we can take advantage of economies of scale. So I think that's a point that I think fundamentally it gets back to the business need, right? And so those were some of the initial slides that I made before, provided before, but I think every time I bring it up, I should restart with those slides. As far as reviewing these documents, the actual JPA document is relatively straightforward. And yes, Greg Stepanisic is very involved in this. So Greg actually has a lot of experience dealing with JPAs. He is actually general counsel to, or he or his company, to CSCDA, which is the giant JPA in the state. And so he has experience with that. Similarly, the 8 other general counsels for the 8 other CCAs have been having separate meetings where they're the ones going through the red lines. So they have had, I believe, 3 face-to-face meetings through Zoom going through this. So the meeting that we're going to have next week is going to be joint CEOs and legal counsel. And I think what we could do is maybe have Greg speak to the board too, to address, he can frame it from a legal standpoint, what the risks and benefits are and how he sees what the risk exposure is to SVCE.
And actually, I just think the process, just saying, we know what we're doing is fine. This is what we're doing and all of that. And this is the process that we will be doing to identify and address the risks in these agreements. I think
Perfect.
that's more what the board cares about, because this is one of those agreements that I don't think, in the past, we used to read the agreements.
Yeah.
I'm concerned that this one's going to be way beyond me.
If I may just say, this particular agreement that you'll see in December is going to be very straightforward, because all it's doing is setting up the JPA. It's very similar to the JPA that we are part of, the SVCE JPA, right? So when you think about that, it's the Joint Powers Agreement document, but this is going to be much simpler than even ours. The one that...
Yeah, so I think I do understand that, and the board will. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem.
The ones going forward.
Yes.
The ones going forward.
Correct. The ones going forward, you're exactly right. The ones going forward will be more complex because, say, think about what we've done in the last 3 years. We've entered into a variety of PPAs, 20-year commitments. $1 billion of financial commitments is what we've made through 7 PPAs. Each of those PPAs are relatively complex, right? That's essentially what the Super JPA would be entering into. A PPA with an energy storage developer. That's essentially the first project that we are looking at. The thing that's going to be different is all our projects have had SVCE as the one and only counterparty. Now you're going to have 9 of us sharing the risk and benefit. So that's exactly right. So Liz, we're not just looking at us, we're also looking over our shoulder at who else are counterparties. Some may be in better financial state or worse financial state. And we want to manage that risk such that other people's failures don't impact us negatively or too negatively, I should say. And that gets, I think, to a comment Rod made in the last meeting, which is you're managing your risk. So I think, yes, the new CFO, we'll ask Greg to comment on the process and also identify how we'll be managing the risks in the participation agreements. Sorry.
Excellent thoughts. Rod?
Yeah, so I think that framing is good. I agree, telling the story again of the fact that although this could grow over time, we have very specific interest in doing this now, focused on this long-term storage project and why we can't simply do it, or why it's not a great idea to do it by our conventional means of working with other CCAs, why we need to do this. I think it's enough to have that compelling reason for this particular project. And then, you know, it's not like we're going to abandon the way we've been doing joint procurement on various projects, but there are certain of these contracts for which the super JPA is the right way to go. And I think if you talk about that, that'll help too. And talking about all the details of the governance of the thing, I think may be less important to the board, frankly. I mean, you could summarize it on a slide or or something, but I wouldn't get into a discussion at the board about voting shares and all of this stuff, because frankly, this is a shell for us to be able to execute deals together. And, and that I think needs to remain the focus.
They're deals within the context of our overall business. They're not, it's a big deal, but it's not that large a percentage. I don't know how to say it, but there's some way to frame it. Again, I think socializing this through your committees, you know, that seems like a really good way to go, because then people can ask detailed and complicated questions that may not be suitable for the forums that we have with all 13 of us there. But, you know, then we'll be down to the key questions in the essence when we get to the bigger. All right. Are there other comments or questions, Margaret, Nancy? Let me double check. Any member of the public wish to comment on this item? If you wish to do so, please indicate that desire by raising your virtual hand. Or if you're on the phone, you can do that by pressing *9. Seeing none, I'll come back to us. Anybody with final thoughts on this? Nancy.
I think this is a good bit of progress. We've been talking about this a long time, and it's good to see it coming forward. The one thing that I didn't see in the questions or the commentary was the strategic nature of improving our clout by working together and addressing some of the concerns of the regulating agencies. I don't know if you want to explain that, but I thought it was a fairly strong selling point.
Any other thoughts? I think it's complicated and there's probably lots of things bouncing around in our brain, but we're happy that we're moving forward. Is that probably a fair summary? Okay.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Chair Memle, for the feedback. This is really useful. I think we will agendize this as an information item for the November meeting and also schedule it for committees. And I think I've got some very good feedback as to how to frame it for the full board meeting. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that. All right. So we're going to close the Super JPA discussion. Upcoming position requests. Girish.
Yeah, so this is going to be kind of a bit of a joint presentation between Melissa and myself. So this is another thing that we've talked about for a bit since about June. We've been, as we were talking about our strategic plan and priorities, and we went out to various people to get input. One of the gaps we kind of decided we've got to manage this year was positions and resources. So next slide, please. So you've seen this slide. We've talked about it at both strategic planning and budget meetings. So when you think about the current state where we are in terms of our outreach on government relations and our power supply and data analytics, we need to do more and get more sophisticated and have a bigger presence there. So we had talked about having 2 new positions, and the board basically gave us a thumbs up saying directionally, we're good with you guys moving forward on that. But we weren't ready to bring to you the actual job description and specifics at the September budget meeting. So we said we'll be bringing it to you in the November, December timeframe. Since then, every meeting that we've talked about it, I think especially for the government relations manager, we've got a lot of head nods from the board and basically saying, hey, let's get going on this. So we have our future state. We are looking at 2 new positions. One's a senior government affairs manager, and the other is in the power resources side. Next slide. I'll hand it over to Mel after the slide. So essentially, on the policy side, we are looking at a senior government affairs manager. We would like to obtain approval and start the recruiting process immediately. On the power resources analyst side, we would like to hold off for a little bit. It gets to Howard's question on recruiting too. We have not been able to fill our principal power analyst position. We went out to recruit. We were unable to fill that position. So what we're thinking right now is, let's wait for the CFO to come in November 9th, because the CFO has a certain skill set, which is very heavily on the energy risk management side. And so I think Monica, he and I would like to kind of put our heads together to see, all right, what's the skill set we need for the additional position that we teed up with the board. So we'll move forward with our current recruiting, which I told you we're going to restart the principal power analyst next week. But we just wanted to take a little breather, let Amrit come in, and then we'll come back to you in Q1 2021 is our thought. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mel to go over the next several slides.
Next slide, please. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So the focus, just in a nutshell, before I go into the slides, the Senior Government Affairs Manager is going to be focused on relationship building. And so this was identified in our strategic plan in terms of community engagement and outreach. That's a specific focus area. And then within our work plan, we also identified the need to engage regulators, legislators, and local electeds in developing policies to protect SVCE customer investments, promote decarbonization, reliability, and affordability. So basically, we want somebody who's going to be able to build those coalitions to meet our core mission and goals, as well as influence policymakers in building a coalition of diverse stakeholders. And so, next slide, please. So basically the duties at a very high level would be focused on building relationships at the state and local level, engaging and collaborated with elected officials, including you, but other sort of also the broad sort of landscape of elected officials at the state and regional and local level to further our mission and goals. Develop responses on key state and local policies that impact SVCE, as well as represent SVCE in various forums at the state, regional, and local level. And again, build a coalition of stakeholders with similar goals to basically amplify our message, because there is definitely power in numbers. I think that's it. I'll stop there. Next slide, just to make sure there's no other slides. Yeah, so the recommendation actually would be to add 1 new position at the November 13th board meeting. And then if approved, we would advertise and recruit at the end of next year, at the end of this year, beginning of next year, hopefully have a short list in interview and onboarding in the Q1 of 2021. And now I will actually stop and see if you have any questions about this position.
Yeah, just one sort of quick question. I'm all super happy with senior government affairs. Then the word manager appears at the end. And I'm just wondering, the list of responsibilities didn't include managing people, but is this intended to form another layer in the organization?
That's a great question. So this position wouldn't manage people, but it's sort of the The name manager is basically to indicate this person would report to me, but would work independently. So it just sort of indicates the level of the type of candidate we'd want in terms of somebody who would really want to work independently, would be able to sort of move with a certain level of self-directedness. So yeah, Gurish, do you want to add anything to that?
It's getting the right salary level too. Yeah, we want someone seen. It's everything Mel said. We did struggle a little bit. Struggle is maybe too strong a word, but yeah, there were in a small organization like this, the literal meaning of manager. Yeah, we don't expect this person to be managing any people.
Okay. You could have pulled an Apple. You could have said senior government affairs evangelist.
That would be good. I like that.
The master of unusual. Apple came up with that title 40 years ago, and it's stuck in their organization forever. All right. Are there other questions that anybody has?
I like Howard's evangelist. I mean, you could think about that, and maybe it's used now widely in tech, and this really is. I think it's an apt description. Microsoft and the others imitated Apple, but
yes,
it's a little more interesting than. But I mean, this is the kind of title that PG&E would use. So, sorry.
We like being creative and innovative in everything except for our finances. Well, even there we're creative, but not too creative. Liz, you had some comments.
I did. So I'm not familiar with the term evangelist at all. So in this context, of course. So a couple of thoughts. Am I correct that these positions have already been identified in the budget? I have a specific reason for asking that. And I'll give you the question, the second part of the question. And you
yes, there have been.
That's what I thought. If you go back to the slides, you keep talking about new position. They are not new positions. You do not want the board to think we are expanding the organization yet again, and we'll have to expand the budget. Yeah. You want to say open positions or something like that.
Okay. All right. I see what you're saying. Yeah, because if the board has approved the money already.
Yeah, and the position, everything. This is simply implementation of the plan to bring in a such and such manager.
Yep.
That kind of thing. That's my primary comment.
Great.
I think that's a very important distinction. And again, it's not that we haven't been talking about these, but you've sort of been formulating your thought process behind exactly where they were going to be and what they, I shouldn't say where, but what all the job duties would be. Nancy,
right, and I think this could be a consent calendar item.
There's an opportunity to explain good stuff that we're doing.
Yeah, could I check on that, Liz? I'm actually just, as we're looking at this, I'm looking at the budget presentation from September, and I'm not seeing it. I need to look at the actual tables. So if we have actually added in the budget, I think we'll go down the path you're recommending. But if we have not added it to the budget, then I think it would actually be an incremental too.
Obviously, yes, and that's really more what's relevant. But we've talked about this several months ago, so I thought it was in the budget.
Yeah, this is sort of the ongoing challenge in the direction that we actually are pretty explicit about in our budget. And I will make the comment when we do this at the board level too, is we do an annual budget, but we are flexible and responsive organization, and a mid-year adjustment is something that we've done every year. We pretty much fully expect it so we can adapt to the ever-changing environments. And when we talked through this, Grish was like, here are the ideas and thoughts I have. Here's what we need now. And there was sort of this future roadmap. And as you recall on the position, the discussion is, I don't want to say never ending, But as we learn more, we're repositioning and we're refocusing. And that's part of being responsive. So I know we've heard it before, whether it's actually a line item in the budget may not really be true, but this didn't come out of the blue. This is something we've been working for a while.
Well, I think that's exactly my point. The presentation either way doesn't convey that this is an ongoing thing as opposed to out of the blue.
Perfect. Great feedback. I think even that first slide that I had is probably an incorrect slide because it's almost like we're starting the discussion now. I think we'll change it to recognize and refer to the previous times we have come to the board and receive support on these positions.
Nancy has some thoughts on this.
Yeah, it was not on the budget. It was presented as a mid-year budget change.
A potential upcoming mid-year budget change.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Again, our cities don't work this way. Everybody's a little bit more rigid. And again, this is a strength. This is not a bad thing. This is a good thing, the way that we work and the way that we think. And so I think there's a positive message here. And these are two bits of capability we're bringing to the organization that will give us more power and more capability. So other comments? Okay, let me double check with the public. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this item? If you wish to do so, please indicate that by raising your virtual hand, or if you're on the phone, you can press *9. Seeing none, we'll come back to us. Any final thoughts?
I'll just say, don't take my comment too literally. If you decide to call it something other than evangelist, I'll be fine with that. Right. Do what works.
There are some more creative titles used in the tech industry, so some of us are familiar with those. And Rod's comment I thought was very old school, which is this is a PG&E title. And hey,
Well,
Rod,
so you know, you're the professionals. You make the call on exactly what it's called.
we have to do what we have to do to recruit the right people.
Yes, and make them feel good about their job. And maybe for some people, manager sounds better than evangelist or whatever.
You gotta fix that red leaf in your background, Rod. It's driving me crazy.
Yeah, you see.
All right. Does anybody have any other final thoughts on this item? We have none. We'll call that finished. We look forward to that coming before the board. Okay. Any committee or staff remarks at this point? I want to thank Girish for being nimble and quick to respond to my request on hiring. Thank you very much. I know
No problem.
we'll all get official notification on Monday, so thank you very much for bringing that forward. Any other comments from anyone? Seeing none, then I think we're going to call this meeting adjourned. Thank you guys for being here and participating.